Good evening. This is the second video in the Legends series. And this one has its origins back to Aldo Leopold and some others who did an initial work on the greater prairie chicken in Wisconsin. I'm sitting on top of Owen Rock, which is a large boulder outcropping. It probably stands about 50 feet over the plain, the marsh, the fields that you saw below. I guess it's a prairie now. This area is actually today it's the southernmost range of the greater prairie chicken. Originally the prairie chicken inhabited the prairies of southern Wisconsin, farther south than here. But as the farmlands developed and urbanization took place, the prairie chicken was forced out of those areas, and the prairies are gone, except for some small pockets. And even here, the grasslands in Wisconsin are too small to really have a thriving prairie chicken population. I wouldn't say the prairie chicken is on the verge of extirpation, but it's pretty close. The Hamerstroms, Frederick and Frances Hamerstrom, who spent the better part of 30 years or more studying the prairie chicken habitat, prairie chicken's needs, developed a plan which incorporates part of this and part of the other grassland reserves that are left in central Wisconsin. But ultimately it's not enough, and while we have 5 large areas of grasslands, they're not interconnected. They're becoming isolated from one another, so that the prairie chicken populations have become isolated from one another. And in fact, the Wisconsin prairie chickens are in complete isolation from any other wild prairie chickens in America. I think the closest is probably the Minnesota flock, which is probably 350 miles away. The prairie chicken in Wisconsin is much like the heath hen of the East Coast. It is in isolation, and unlike the heath hen, there are large parcels of land that are still being maintained as grasslands for their habitat. So hopefully, unlike the heath hen and its extinction, the prairie chicken has some future in Wisconsin. Albeit as more of a zoo specimen than a true self-sustaining wild population. In that regard, I think in 2006, we started the Department of Natural Resources and the University of Wisconsin started bringing some female prairie chickens from the Minnesota flock to artificially increase the genetic diversity within this flock. Much like breeding programs in a zoo. But anyway, this property was the original research plot or area of the Hamerstroms, Frederick and Frances Hamerstrom. Who from about 1940 until Frederick's death and almost Frances's death in '89, I believe, worked hard to develop a plan to set aside parcels in a checkerboard pattern, 40 and 80 acre parcels of grasslands connected or spaced between agricultural plantings. For the most part it works. However, as I said, there is not enough of these grasslands interconnecting the 5 larger pieces of reserve that are existing. So we have prairie chickens for how long? Quite a while. Are they natural? No. But the story of the Hamerstroms is pretty interesting. They lived in a Civil War era farmhouse. It was actually built as a stage stop, a community center. Let me give you a shot of that right here. A rainy day at the former Hamerstrom house, the former stage stop, community center of Judge Walker, built before the Civil War in the 1850s, and has really never been finished. Welcome back. So, in the 1850s, that Hamerstrom house was built by Waushara County's first judge. I think I referenced that, Judge Walker. The Civil War took place and the structure was never actually fully completed. The era of the stage died away as tracks were laid in this area. And in the 1940s, the Hamerstroms took up residence in the Judge Walker's dream, I guess. They eventually purchased it and quite a bit of acreage around the house. It's funny. It's one of the, as you saw today, is probably how it looked in the 1940s when they first moved in. It was never painted, or if it was stripped back down. It never had plumbing put in. Electrical was put in. And they lived in that home for the most of their life. It's an interesting story. Frances, or Fran, I think she published 10 books in her lifetime, numerous papers. But the books were aimed at the general population. And as you saw at the front of this video, there's a stack of her books. And this title is named Strictly for the Chickens. I am smoking in a Bari Lane Limited's Crown Achievement. Crown Achievement is one of the many reintroduced versions from Scandinavian tobacco company Lane Limited Group. And this is an old tobacco, but it was changed over the years. This rare mixture is composed of the finest Latakia, Virginia, and Oriental tobaccos. When it was first introduced, the blend also contained Perique, but this element was removed circa 2004. We have once again added Perique to this faithful recreation of a storied blend. So, it's a nice English tobacco. I would call it a medium, maybe a little bit stronger than a medium. And I believe this is a 7091 shape, and I don't know that that's really a shape because I've seen a lot of different shapes bearing that number from Bari. It's a Bari Wiking, stamped, handmade in Denmark, and 7091 stamped in the bottom. So, that's all I have for today. A quick overview of the Hamerstroms atop Owen Rock, which has become a graffiti mess, and all along it is quite the litter. So obviously nobody practices pack out what you pack in. distressing. Well, on further contemplation, perhaps my comment about the graffiti was misplaced and too negative. Because upon further thought, aren't petroglyphs and pictograms nothing more than ancient graffiti? Drawings and carvings that we work hard to preserve today? Well, in that spirit, let's take a look at some of the modern pictographs. So there you go. Pictographs of modern man. Aren't they beautiful? All right, that's Owen Rock. That's Leola Marsh. And I am trailing the woolly mammoth. He's that way, about 20 miles. So I'll be back on the Ice Age Trail at some point. And until then, I hope you do well. Doing well now, and perhaps I'll see you again.